Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you all to this occasion. I'm Yasmin Andela Bilioma, Senior Manager with APO Group, and I'm your host today. It is my pleasure to moderate this session. To access the audio feed in French, please click on the globe icon at the bottom of the screen. Si vous souhaitez écouter la conférence en français, merci de cliquer sur l'icône en forme de globe qui est située tout en bas de l'écran. REVOLVE Circular is convening this virtual press conference today in partnership with APO Group to highlight the opportunities and challenges of a circular economy and why more efforts are needed to educate various stakeholders on circularity. REVOLVE Circular is a nonprofit organization based in Vienna, Austria, advocating for a more circular economy by independent and constructive reporting, brokering knowledge, and science communication. Business leaders, policymakers, and citizens need to be educated about the circular economy, on emerging paradigm and critical concepts that provide many opportunities across the world. By the end of this press conference, journalists will learn about circularity in line with their region, which will enable them to report on circular transformation. Today, we are joined by many journalists coming from across the world, from the US, Europe, Africa, and Asia. And I would like now to take this opportunity to introduce you to the panel. During this conference, we will have the pleasure to meet Kyle Ritchie, Education Sustainable Design Lead for CannonDesign and founder of Circular Economy Studio in the United States of America. And you will also meet Jocelyne Landry Tsonang, member of the Executive Committee of the African Circular Economy Network, ACEN, based in Cameroon. And we will also dedicate some time to Walter Vermeulen, professor in governance of corporate sustainability and circular economy at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. And finally, you will have the pleasure to meet Søren Bauer, president of REVOLVE Circular in Austria and Germany. The program for this exceptional press conference is as follows. Our speakers will start with 4 initial statements, followed by a 40-minute Q&A session, where journalists will be given the opportunity to ask questions. As we go along, if you have any questions, please use our dedicated Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen, and our experts will gladly answer them during the session. And also, please don't forget to mention your name, your publication when you submit those questions. And you can also raise your hand if you wish to go live. Kyle, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. So good morning, everyone. My name is Kyle Ritchie. I come to you from the United States, more specifically the great city of Chicago. I'm beyond thrilled to join you today as the co-author of the new book, Circular Economy for Dummies. This book will officially be published on April 27th, but a preview can be made available to any journalist who's interested in reviewing this book as part of a larger article or story. So in addition to authoring the Circular Economy for Dummies, I am the Sustainable Design Lead for CannonDesign's education practice. We facilitate elementary school design as well as design for academic facilities for universities and colleges. And my job is essentially to make sure that we do so in a way that minimizes construction and demolition waste, keeps building materials in use for as long as possible, and regenerate natural systems. So we have offices in the United States, Canada, as well as India. So you may be curious what a sustainable design consultant is doing writing about the circular economy. Well, here's why. The leaders of the world now know that we are currently undergoing the largest wave of urban growth in human history. More than half of the global population is now concentrated within an urban area. And has been calculated by 2060, roughly 2/3 of the expected global population of 10 billion will live in cities. In order to meet the housing needs for all of these people, we expect to add roughly 230 billion square meters of new floor area to the global building stock, which is essentially doubling it by 2060. And to put that in scale for everyone, this is the equivalent of adding an entire New York City every single month for the next 40 years. So buildings and their construction together account for roughly 36% of global energy use and make up 39% of energy-related carbon dioxide emissions annually, according to the UN. So not to mention requires a vast amount of finite resources as well. And that footprint is only going to keep growing in the AEC industry. So the question is, how do we make sure that we don't completely drain our resource base while trying to meet the needs of some 10 billion people? Next slide, please. And that's really where the circular economy comes in. Within the architecture, engineering, and construction industry, we extract valuable resources from the environment. We schlep them onto ships and send them around the globe, and then assemble them into buildings only to deconstruct them 30 years later and generate an astonishing amount of waste. And that's not how it needs to be, though. The circular economy can help us eliminate waste from construction streams. It can help us design out waste completely. And by doing so, we're going to maintain the value of building materials rather than simply throw them away. I always like to use the example, you deposit money into a bank, anticipating that the value of that money will be maintained when you go to withdraw it. And I approach building materials with the same mindset. So to maintain the value of that material bank, we'll prioritize building reuse and repair and remanufacturing to hold on to those materials and allow the natural systems of our world to regenerate themselves. Next slide. So within my industry, I utilize the circular economy as a design framework on very, very large scales at times, such as for entire university campuses. I develop plans over the next 30 years of what infrastructure upgrades they should be developing and how to do that in a circular way. Next slide. But I also do that on an individual building level, based on the anticipated building life cycle for each of the facilities, whether we're talking about structure, the facade, or the fixtures inside. These life cycles can be assessed and optimized to eliminate waste. So thank you for having me today as part of this amazing conversation. I look forward to it.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Now we are going back to Professor Walter.
Thank you very much. My name is Walter Vermeulen from Utrecht University in the Netherlands. I will highlight a few notes on the role of science and some main lessons of the work being done in that context. Of course, science and academia is partly busy with educating people, young people, creating the capacity of professionals for the future. But there's also a lot of research. I don't see my slides at the moment. Are the slides coming back?
Yes, he will show up in a few seconds.
So one of the things that scientists tend to do mostly is increase complexity in the analysis. And what we see in the field of circularity is that there are inputs from many different disciplines, and they need to be balanced to some extent. One important thing is if we talk about circularity, I don't see the slides. I don't know if the audience sees them. Should I continue?
Yes, please continue there.
Yeah. One of the things is many different disciplines are addressing the issues of circularity. Partly it's about the life cycles, the value chain of production, and a lot of technological knowledge is necessary there, as well as inputs from economics to make assessments. But it's about far more than just only the material cycles. Like in the slides by Kyle, from the extraction of materials into production processes and into, yeah, you can show the second slide straight away. So here we have a complex picture of the value chain. But it's not about only about the materials floating around in value chains, but also around the world. And the scarcity issue which is behind it, which was illustrated quite clearly with the growing population and the growing consumption that we can anticipate it. links to a wider discussion about sustainability, which partly stresses the environmental challenges, and not alone about scarcity and landfilling, but also about climate change, the need of climate change mitigation, addressing biodiversity, etc. But sustainability is also about fair distribution of our Earth's resources. So the social dimension is as important as well. So looking for solutions, we have to take this combined planet and people perspective. Next slide, please. Yes, well, this more or less article is where we made this rough analysis of the inputs of various disciplines. I don't want to go into that at the moment, so please, next slide. For this presentation, I think it's good to highlight that this article led to synthesizing of very different concepts, and in the end it runs down to 10 action imperatives of how to create value retention, or to maintain the value in products and in materials. And what we see at some places in the world, that recycling policies have been elaborated with different levels of success, but still very much focusing on the long loops of mass material recycling, which is often leading to downcycling. And the current state of the debate is how to move to the shorter little long loops and the short loops, stressing also the need for another consumer perspective and reduction and refuse. Let's go to the next slide. And for this, I would like to highlight a few main messages, and it's important to distinguish for this between the high and low income countries, because the storyline is completely different in these cases. And I think it's good to shortly highlight some imperatives for both the consumer side and the producer side. Next slide, please. So if we look in the north or in the high income countries, the main message for consumers in countries where recycling policies have been implemented in the last decades already is to push more for selective use as buyer, be very selective, demand recycled content in products that you buy at the moment. And as a consumer, if you don't need to use a certain product anymore, be aware of it. Don't throw it away as waste, but separate it properly, or even better, share products as long as they can still have a lifetime extension. And then for the producers in the high-income countries where recycling policies have been implemented, still there's an urge to go into redesign of products, which Carly was also stressing. And at the selling side for producers, there should be far more transparency on what they do with recycled materials, whether they are actually applying this, and they are taking full responsibility in the for the end of life of their products. Many countries introduced a system which is called extended producer responsibility, which means that they need to take care of this end of life of products and have to pay the price for that. But still, the full price of what we are consuming is not integrated in the product prices on the market. So there's still a big challenge over there. But this would be the advices at high-income country level. Looking at low-income countries, we have a completely different storyline here. In many cases, but the next speaker, Jocelyne, will elaborate on this more. She is now in the group, I see. So I can make this very short, but here the challenge is actually that we should try to maintain some of the richness in low-income countries, like the sharing cultures. But there's a fast challenge still to build up proper waste collection and recycling infrastructures in most of the low-income countries. And for producers, especially producers that are importing into low-income countries, the responsibility should be taken there as well. We see, we do work, for example, also in Nigeria, and we still see that a vast volume of what is being consumed is imported materials from the north, from the rich countries. And the rich countries are still using low-income countries as a sort of a dump place without taking care of how this is being dealt with. So we're working with partners in Nigeria to move to what we call a full producer responsibility, where they also pay for the exported waste and leftovers from the north. This is where I'll rest my case.
Thank you, Walter, for this exciting presentation. Now we are going to move on to Jocelyne Landry Tsonang. She's a member of the Executive Committee of the African Circular Economy Network in Cameroon. Jocelyne?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm here. Hello. Network is not good.
Thank you, Jocelyne. You can go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Distinguished guests, dear journalists, and all our viewers. Today, I'm going to entertain you on a topic. Please, can you come back to the previous slide? Okay, so we're going to see why African businesses and policy making. We are going to talk about African businesses, policy making, and the circular economy, and see why this is a pathway to sustainable economic growth in Africa. So my name is Jocelyne Landry. I am an executive team member of the African Circular Economy Network. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so for us to start first, it is important to get a sneak peek into what circular economy really is. And it's true that there is no commonly agreed definition, because there are well over 100 attempts to define circular economy. But what is the definition of circular economy? The answer depends on who exactly you ask and what kind of main circular economy discourse they follow. So, but there are three principles which circular economies evolve around, and this is commonly agreed by everyone. The first principle is that circular economy design out waste and pollution. It keeps products and material in use while preserving their highest value and for the longest time. And it also helps regenerate natural systems. So a circular economy with help curve carbon emission, preserve natural resources, and mitigate the effect of climate change while creating new jobs. Next slide, please. So circular economy practices and policies. Why are they a potential for African economic growth? First is the population of Africa being one of the main force, because we all know Africa's population is predicted to double in just over 25 years. And the growth of this population is moving alongside with the growth of urbanization rate as well, creating an unprecedented market potentials. And most economies in Africa are led by natural resources extraction. No one can refuse that. Circular economy is definitely the best approach because it embraces and we help ensure more sustainable exploitation of resources by preserving the potential for future generation. This is why African economies need to embrace it. And circular economy presents opportunities to considerably improve people, planet, and profit in some main industries such as agribusiness, construction, textile, energy, transportation, manufacturing, and planet. So all this is showing us that circular economy would be the best tool to to enable the growth, the sustainable growth of the African economy. But then there are some challenges for the implementation of circular practices in Africa that must be tackled in order for us to have the continent truly benefit from circular economy practices. We have institutional capacity which are weak because policymakers do not truly understand why circular economy is beneficial for Africa, given the fact that the continent accounts only for 5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So most of the time they feel it is for people who are mostly polluting the planet. There is lack of understanding as well of the concept. Policymakers believe circular economy boils down just to recycling and waste management, whereas recycling is the last resort when we are talking about circular economy. And the waste management they need to understand that circular economy is not limited to waste management, but that it starts with the design phase, which is designing out waste and pollution. And we also have regulatory frameworks that at times do not exist, or even when they exist, most of them are counterproductive. And we have this in many countries, even here in Cameroon and other African countries as well. So the academia space, which is supposed to be educating the next consumer and the next producer, does not really understand why circular economy is different from other concepts like green economy and sustainability. Now they need to seize the opportunity to embed circular economy in curricula, in school curricula, and also practice it in schools and campuses, so that the next pool of consumers and producers can live it and practice it. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
All right, thank you so much, Jocelyne. This was very insightful. Now we are going to give the floor to Soren Bauer, is the president of REVOLVE Circular. Soren?
Thank you, Yasmina, and thank you, everyone. Well, we planned this briefing to actually be done by 3:20, which is now 3:20 our time. So please bear with us. I'm the last presenter. I know it can be a bit boring to watch one presentation after the other. You will have at least half an hour to ask questions, and we will continue thereafter. So I will kind of run you quickly through my presentation, which as usual has too many slides. You have already learned and heard about a lot of complex terms which you might have heard for the first time. My presentation is on circular economy and what's in it for you, what's in it for the media. So let's go. Next slide, please. I believe there are three main things for you in a circular economy as journalists, publishers, and media decision makers. My key message would be the circular economy actually has a potential to become a new beat, which is mass media communications jargon. There's a lot happening there. Circular economy, I would say, is quite a hype in Europe and in other countries. There are thousands of news stories you can tell. If you tell the stories right, if you invest into your own understanding of what circular economy means or can mean and how different stakeholders view it, you can tell these stories better. And it will enable you to play your watchdog role as media. We already see some companies moving into what we have started to call circularity washing, which might be a kind of specific form of greenwashing, which is interesting to watch. Next slide, please. So looking at media and talking to journalists, I thought I come up with a few theoretical things about media frames. Many of you might know this. I still want to say it here. Framing is about how you package a story and how you package it and which kind of selection you make, since circular economy is complex and you cannot tell the whole story in just one story, one feature or whatever you do. You have to make those choices. Circular economy will provide interesting channels for journalists. I'm working and writing on these things myself. You will need to make up your mind. Are you only writing stories about growth or stories about reduction, or maybe the kind of complex interplay in between reducing or reduction and economic growth? Is all of this just about economic growth or other kinds of growth? What does it mean for people? What does it mean for society? Are questions you may want to ask yourself and address in your articles. Will you write stories about waste management and recycling or about circular design, as Jocelyne just said? And will you, in a world which is less than 10% circular, according to the Circularity Gap report, which our colleagues at Circular Economy are producing, will you look at barriers coming out of a linear economic system, world system, or will you look at circular economy opportunities? Next slide. So here are a few story ideas and a few media frames for you very quickly. Our colleagues at the ACEA, which is the African Circular Economy Alliance, founded by the governments of South Africa, Rwanda, and Nigeria a few years ago, have just come up with a great report on African circular economy market research. I think it will be presented officially tomorrow. And there are a few industries in there, which you see on the left-hand side, which are interesting. ICLEI and ACEN have worked on circular cities in Africa and what circularity means for urbanization, and so does the OECD. Colleagues at an organization called Footprints in Africa have just released a report on circularity in different industry areas, which you can see on the right. And they look into companies working on electronic waste, plastics, construction, and other areas. So these are stories which you can tell. Next slide, please. Can I have the next slide? Yes. Since both ACEA and also Footprints Africa have identified construction and infrastructure development as a potential for circularity, I identified this great school in Malawi, which has been built with straw bales. So this is circular economy 100%. It's about using local materials. It's about natural resources, and it's about modality, how you construct, how you design a building in a modular manner. Next slide, please. There's another story to tell, which is a story about industrialization. In circular economy, there's something called industrial symbiosis. It's something you might hear about for the first time. I still want to put it here to convey to you how big circular economy can be. If we look at Africa, there's a little, very, very little recognition, or probably recognition is there, but countries are struggling with how to build an industrial park where you have different kinds of industries, where the waste of one industry becomes the resource of the other. That was very much, or is very much, the Chinese approach to circular economy. This can be done, and it's called industrial symbiosis. Next slide. I want to try to stick to my time. That's why I'm rushing through it. Circular economy is also pretty much a consumer topic. So if you look at consumption and how we consume, you can look at particularly SDG 12, which is about responsible consumption and production. We know that people in the industrial world consume much more than people in the developing world or in emerging economies. So there's a story to tell about how people in industrialized countries actually reduce their consumption, because the biggest impact we can make is to reduce our consumption. Next slide, please. I'm almost coming to the end. Here's another frame, circular economy and climate change. The Dutch government, together with the Finnish Innovation Fund Citra, are holding a 2-day conference as of tomorrow, only to look at the potential of circular policies and practices to reduce carbon emission. So that's a circular economy and climate change story, which is worthwhile looking at. Next slide. 2 words of caution before I come to an end, and sorry for going a little bit over time. There's a very interesting paradox called Jevons paradox in environmental economics, and you will see it on the next slide. I think you will understand it. You can read it here. This is a theory. When you see the image, you will understand it. And I believe, yeah, there you go. Thank you, David. Jevons paradox is essentially about efficiency gains in a certain resource or raw material, which do actually not reduce the, David, you're not too fast. Back to the slide with Jevons paradox, please, because people need to understand this. Thank you. Jevons paradox, please, the one with the image with the cars, just stay there. Thank you, just stay where you are. So this is a bit complicated, but I hope the image illustrates it properly. It's something which I want to bring to your attention because I believe it can be pretty much a danger for circular policies and practices in a developing or emerging economy context. Once you start gaining in efficiency, this might lead to using a resource actually more. Just imagine someone found a great way to reduce diesel consumption of all these generators in Nigeria. The result would not be less generators and less diesel consumption. The result would be more generators and more diesel consumption, which is what this paradox is trying to describe. And it's coming from someone who analyzed this back in 1865. So this is more than 150 years ago. Next slide, please. And then I come to the end. Yeah. One thing I want to say is that the circular economy to us at REVOLVE Circular is useless if you don't put people at the center. There are a lot of people working on this. I recently watched this video from Walter Stahl, who wrote about the performance economy already more than 20 years ago, and I would recommend it to you. Next slide. At REVOLVE Circular, we launch on Monday next week something which is heavily related. We want to ask 1 million people around the world about their view of imagined circular economy, exactly because there is no commonly agreed definition. And we launched this in English on the 19th of April. This will be a global survey, which will remain online until the 15th of January next year. And we hope to have many partners and many different language versions so that people around the world can take this survey, which will be fast and fun and still enable us to understand what people think and how they view circular economy. Next slide. This is my last slide. I want to invite you to be in touch or get in touch with us. We still produce a quarterly magazine. We like to republish great circular economy content. I have started developing a massive open online course on circular economy for journalists and media decision makers because I think it's needed. And we also have a draft concept for a media award to actually recognize high quality reporting on circularity. And I would be done. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Soren, for this exciting presentation on circular economy. We are going to start our Q&A session now. We have a first question from Martin Ekpepe from IT Pulse in Nigeria. Martin's question is, in most countries of Africa where proper waste management is lacking, what steps do you advise for government to take to key into the circular economy, especially in the area of e-waste, which many people believe is hazardous to health? Jocelyne, I believe you'll be the most appropriate to answer this question. Jocelyne?
Yes, I'm trying to turn my mic on. Hello, yes, I was trying to turn my mic on.
No problem.
E-waste, what we can do, we have some companies already pioneering in e-waste management in Africa. We have closed the loop from Netherlands, working in Cameroon and 2 other countries, buying secondhand or used e-waste or discarded e-waste to sending them back to Holland to reprocess or refurbish. So, and we also have many initiatives like that in Cameroon, and I'm sure we have some over in other African countries, because most of the time we should not think the government can do everything. I think entrepreneurs, they also have a great capacity in helping in this e-waste management because it is a specific type of waste management. We see that people do not discard electronics like on any other waste. When they have maybe a used phone or a phone that is even bad, the tendency is to leave it in the house, even if it's not working. But when they know that they get an incentive, why collecting, why giving away the used phone so that it can be recycled, or the useful materials in it can recycle, then they are prompt to do it. So what the government can step in and do is to put in policies in place that are going to help entrepreneurs operating in this area to do that job easily and help make the environment more conducive for such activities.
Thank you very much, Jocelyne. Now we have another question, actually 3 questions from Babacar Sen in Senegal. So his first question is, quelle est la définition de l'économie circulaire? Sa deuxième question, quelle importance pour nos pays en Afrique où l'approche globale ou intégrée est toujours ressentie à travers les activités utilisatrices et génératrices de ressources, tant humaines que financières? Sa dernière question, les perspectives pour nous en tant que journalistes. Que peuvent être notre rôle, mais aussi vos attentes dans la perception de l'économie circulaire étant étendue que chaque pays a sa spécificité? Soren, would you like to answer the first question?
Je peux essayer, oui. Alors, Babacar, j'espère que vous êtes avec nous. C'est 3 grandes questions et je ne suis pas sûr d'avoir bien compris la deuxième. Je commence par la première. La réponse est simple. Jocelyne a déjà donné la première réponse. Il n'y a pas de définition ou une seule définition qui soit acceptée par toutes les parties prenantes. Nous voyons qu'il y a 3 voire 4 discours différents autour de la question de l'économie circulaire, et la réponse à cette question est vraiment, comme Jocelyne l'a déjà dit, ça dépend de à qui on pose la question. Il y a certaines composantes qui sont plus ou moins accordées par toutes les parties prenantes, mais il n'y a pas une seule définition qu'on puisse copier-coller pour dire c'est ça l'économie circulaire. J'aurais besoin d'une répétition de la troisième question. La deuxième était définitivement un peu trop longue, un peu trop complexe. Mais si je pourrais avoir la troisième question encore une fois, je pourrais essayer de répondre.
Yes, of course. Je te la répète. La troisième question est les perspectives pour nous en tant que journalistes. Quels sont nos rôles, mais aussi les attentes dans la perception de l'économie circulaire, étant donné que chaque pays a sa spécificité?
Tout à fait. Bonne question. Merci. Alors, concernant la spécificité des pays, effectivement, que ce soit des pays africains ou autres, européens, en Amérique latine, c'est justement ça le contexte. Ce matin, j'ai brièvement suivi une présentation justement des collègues de ACEN sur comment concevoir une stratégie nationale de l'économie circulaire. Je sais qu'en Afrique, il y a certains pays qui sont déjà en avance parce qu'il s'agit plutôt d'un processus où plusieurs parties prenantes doivent venir ensemble pour collaborer sur déjà la définition de l'économie nationale à l'heure actuelle. Quels sont donc les marchés ou le genre d'industrie où une pensée circulaire a effectivement un sens? On ne va pas faire de l'économie circulaire pour avoir fait de l'économie circulaire, ça doit avoir un sens. Et il y a dans certaines industries que ça a beaucoup plus de sens que dans d'autres. L'agriculture en est un, la construction est un autre, le packaging, tout ce qui est plastique sont normalement des industries ou des secteurs où ça a un sens. Quant au rôle des journalistes, ben, comme je disais dans ma présentation, c'est vraiment, dans un premier temps, investir dans votre propre compréhension de mais qu'est-ce que c'est l'économie circulaire? Tout le monde en parle, j'ai envie de mieux comprendre. Et vraiment d'investir à lire un peu plus, regarder des vidéos et ainsi de suite, pour ne pas faire des conclusions un peu prématurées. Une fois que vous avez le sentiment d'avoir mieux compris de qu'est-ce que c'est, être à la veille de qu'est-ce qu'ils disent, qu'est-ce qu'ils font les uns et les autres, pour pouvoir bien expliquer le pour et le contre. Et je dirais aussi essayer de comprendre en fait pourquoi l'économie linéaire, dont on parle peu, mais c'est quand même le modèle prédominant dans le monde entier, pourquoi une économie linéaire qui génère beaucoup de déchets, qui nous a mis dans un monde où la consommation voilà, c'est un passe-temps pour certains même. Donc, comment cette économie linéaire a pu avoir autant de succès et quelles sont les barrières qu'elle a mises pour une économie circulaire? Merci.
Merci encore, Soren. Now we have another question from Ritchie. How related is a circular economy with initiatives such as carbon trade? Kyle or Walter, would you like to answer?
Which question should I answer on?
How related is a circular economy with initiatives such as carbon trade?
Well, the carbon trade initiatives in Europe are a complex way to make companies pay for their emissions of carbon dioxide. Climate change forces us to reduce these emissions, but the trading systems are too weak to really push for that. But there is a clear relation between circularity and reduction of energy and the climate emissions following on that, because in the first parts of the production process of many types of products, the energy use, the indirect energy use is very large, and recycling materials and applying secondary materials instead of newly mined materials actually produces a lot of emission reduction. In that sense, there's a very clear relation to it. The other side is that we always have to be very careful in measuring it, because bringing to be recycled materials back to the origin also takes energy. So there's always a very delicate analysis necessary for that.
Thank you very much, Walter. Would you like to add on to the previous question of Marta Ekpekpe regarding e-waste?
Yes, indeed. I would like to highlight some work that we're doing in Nigeria at the moment, and it is about e-waste. What we see is in Nigeria and many other countries that the infrastructure for waste treatment is very weak. At the same time, we see that a lot of products like e-waste, but also other types of products like clothing and cars and tires and whatever are imported into African countries. Now, what we're doing together with our partners in Ibadan University in Nigeria is investigating opportunities to get out of this. We see in Nigeria a small number of companies that are actually recycling old electronic equipment on a high level, but there's no funding for these kind of things. And at the same time, we see that in Nigeria, there's a huge import of second-hand, so-called still usable electronic equipment from Europe, from the US, And remarkably, actually, in these countries where it comes from, we have extended producer responsibility, which means that producers, the European Union introduced that for all countries, that producers are paying for the proper recycling of end-of-life products. It get partially exported, but then the costs of properly dealing with that, with those products, which are often only used 1 year or 2 years in Nigeria, the cost of doing that are not included in this. So we will have a discussion in mid-May on a Circular Africa conference organized by IBEDAN, where we are discussing a new model of extended producer responsibility, where also the costs of these exports and proper dealing with these exports after use in Africa are on the table. And what we actually hope, we did some analysis on that, but we are drafting a statement, which hopefully can be shared by many countries in Africa, a statement on taking full responsibility for the exported waste. And we start with e-waste, but this model can be copied also to other types of waste, like exports of clothing and you name it. So that's an interesting development I would like to highlight.
Thank you so much for highlighting this, Professor. Now we have a question from Mariama Diene. She's a journalist at L'Enquête in Senegal. Comment l'économie circulaire peut-elle mener au développement économique des pays africains? Est-ce qu'elle peut être une économie de solution pour résoudre la question du chômage en Afrique? I believe Jocelyne will be appropriate for this question. Jocelyne?
Ok, merci Mariama déjà pour votre question qui est assez pertinente et qui est posée par plus d'une personne. Déjà, il faut savoir que l'économie circulaire n'est pas seulement un moyen pour le développement économique de l'Afrique, mais elle est encore plus pour le développement économique durable de l'Afrique, parce que c'est important de le noter. Un développement économique qui n'est pas durable n'en vaut pas la peine, parce que ça ne sert à rien de finir les ressources et de ne pas avoir de quoi laisser aux générations futures. Donc, la question qu'on se pose aussi, c'est oui, on veut être économiquement développé, mais pour quel futur? Qu'est-ce qu'on veut laisser aux futures générations? Alors, l'économie circulaire se pose déjà comme une réponse à tout ceci, parce que, tel que je l'ai dit dans ma présentation, la majorité des économies africaines sont basées sur l'extraction des ressources naturelles. Au Sénégal, par exemple, vous avez les minerais, vous avez beaucoup de poissons et autres ressources naturelles. Maintenant, si les principes d'économie circulaire sont utilisés dans ces différentes industries extractives, ceci permettra de régénérer ces écosystèmes qui sont des habitats pour ces ressources et forcément nous permettra non seulement d'optimiser l'extraction ou bien d'optimiser les ressources que nous prélevons des différents écosystèmes, mais aussi de pouvoir laisser un capital sur pied pour les générations futures. En plus, l'économie circulaire est un modèle qui crée beaucoup d'emplois et nous savons tous comment est-ce qu'en Afrique aujourd'hui, nous avons besoin de ces emplois et aussi quand nous regardons la croissance démographique, nous avons beaucoup de jeunes qui sont au chômage et l'économie circulaire serait vraiment une solution pour créer plus d'emplois, mieux gérer nos ressources et mieux gérer nos villes également. Je ne sais pas si ça répond à votre question.
Parfait. Merci encore, Jocelyne. Nous avons une autre question de Age qui va poser sa question live. Age, please go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me? I'm Mr. Rege from Hargeisa, Somaliland. I would like to ask you, how is it possible to engage community participating economy, circular economy and circular economy projects?
Would you please repeat your question, Age, and mention your publication and country? Thank you.
And first, my name is Muhammad. I'm calling Hage, my nickname. I'm calling from Hargeisa, Somaliland for the National Television of Somaliland. I would like to ask you, how could a circular economy project can help and you see, boost for community livelihood.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. Jocelyne, would you go answer this question again? Thank you.
Yes.
He was asking how we can involve community in circular economy projects, if I got him well.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so that's very, it depends on which community you live in, but for what I know, like in Asia or in Africa, we are very community-oriented people, and it is very easy for us to involve communities in our various projects. And we have many local-based organizations working with community on circular economy projects, be it in the agricultural industry, in the waste management industry, or in the construction industry. So it is all about identifying the problem, which is very important to a community. Let's say if it is a community that practices agriculture on 80% or 70% of members of the community practice agriculture, and you come in with a circular economy concept that's going to help them improve on their yield and produce more healthy food, I'm sure they are going to buy in the idea and participate. For instance, we have communities in Cameroon where they are trained how to transform organic waste into organic fertilizers. And this helps them save money, and also it helps them regenerate the soil that you're using, and it helps them to produce more healthy food. And healthy food lasts longer, because when you use chemical fertilizer, for instance, the food that you produce get bad very fast, as opposed to when you're using organic fertilizers. So we have local-based NGOs training this community to transform the waste that was supposed to be transformed into methane or any greenhouse gas into the atmosphere, which is turned into compost.
Thank you.
And they use it
but in my country,
advance
where I'm from, is Somaliland. Sorry for disturbance. I'm from Somaliland. Even my community has no idea about what's circular economy in the location where I live.
I think it's all about you telling them this is circular economy, because I know many communities in Africa practice it without knowing it is circular economy they are practicing. And your role as a journalist is to help them, to educate them. Why? When you educate yourself, then you will be empowered to educate your communities on how to use circular economy to improve their livelihood, because it's all about improving the living conditions of humans.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you too.
All right, thank you very much, Aid, for your question, and thank you, Jocelyne. Now we have another question from Nathalie Cambo from Evolve Media Holdings. She has two questions, actually. The first one is, we hear of climate change and we hear of circular economy. These terms can sometimes be confusing for an average person on the streets. Could someone simplify this for me? In reality, I would like to find out what the link is between the two. Second question, is it possible that I missed out on a below? How exactly can we link circular economy to business? And how do we understand how can this impact various businesses across the continent? Which one of you guys would like to answer?
I would like to take a stab at the first question, if that's okay with the group.
Sure thing.
So there definitely is a direct connection between climate change and the circular economy. As you might have heard mentioned previously in the presentation, that one of the goals or frameworks of the circular economy is to allow natural systems, natural environments to regenerate themselves. So within the linear economy, we are constantly extracting resources from the natural environment and therefore essentially destroying these much larger systems. So this anthropogenic effect is the cause of climate change. So once you lessen your burden on the natural environment by circulating the materials that you already have, you're therefore allowing the climate to essentially regenerate itself, and you're therefore minimizing the impact humans have on the environment as well. If someone would like to take the second question, that's fine.
Thank you very much, Kyle, for this answer. Now, Soren, would you like to answer the second question?
Thank you, Yasmina, and thank you. I think it was Natalie and Kumbe from the Evolve Media Holding. That's a tricky one. What I'm more specialized in is circular economy, and as I tried to point out, the Dutch government, together with the Finnish Innovation Fund Citra, having a two-day event starting tomorrow on exactly that question, basically to make the point that circular thinking, looking at our resource consumption, looking at more resource efficiency, has definitely a strong impact on reducing our carbon emission and on climate change. I'm, however, too little knowledgeable in this area. I will follow those 2 days myself to learn more myself. So I don't feel like I'm the right person to answer this question. As regards explaining circular economy, I would once again want to say that it's not necessarily that important for people to know what exactly circular economy is, since it's like kind of a floating umbrella concept, which means many different things to many different people, depending who you are and where you come from. The more important thing might be maybe one of the key messages of circular economy in a certain way is that the way we have been doing things until date is definitely wrong. We cannot afford in the one world which we have to continue running our economies in a heavily extractive, linear, take, make, waste way. And something else needs to happen. We need to find a different approach and do this quickly. The hype around the circular economy is probably due to the fact that it's relatively easily comprehensible in the sense that, you're building in circularity, you build in closed loops, you build in something which helps you not waste everything which you initially invested. And you're trying to retain value, as Walter explained. That makes total sense in a world with more people and with limited resources. I will hand over to Walter because I see you raised your hand. Thank you. You're muted, Walter.
I thought I was muted, so I muted myself again. While answering to the question of what companies can do, actually, circular economy in that sense is not completely new. There's a long history of cleaner production. Søren Bauer already mentioned industrial symbiosis, where producers identify any type of remains in their production process and look for others who could use that. That has been promoted since the late 1990s. So for producers, they could map out the material flows in their companies, and for each everything that does not end up in the product itself, you have to look for alternatives and not just put it in a landfilling destiny bin in that sense. So there's a lot of support systems for helping companies to do that. And it has been implemented in European countries, Northern American countries, even in China, I would say. But still, that's
your contribution. Now we have another question from Samuel Uma from Pan-African Visions in Nairobi. Have you ever thought of partnering with the UNEP to make the environment a safe place to live in? Soren or Jocelyne?
Yeah, I can come in first and then Jocelyne. Yes, obviously, the UN Environment Programme is a big and an important player. For your information, they have recently launched, together with UNIDO and the DG Environment of the European Commission, what is called GACERE, the Global Alliance of Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency. This was just launched, I believe, around about 6 weeks ago, with a lot of ministers from all around the world committing to better understanding circularity, investing in it, looking at what it means for their respective countries, as well as in resource efficiency. So UNEP is...
can give to businesses or investors to motivate them to invest in a circular economy. Carl, Walter, Soren?
Yeah, this is a discussion held in many countries at the moment, I think. Somebody was referring to the emission trades systems, but in the case of circularity, there's a lot of support of new initiatives and knowledge sharing and those kind of things in Europe. What we advise from our institute to the Dutch government is push for one very simple instrument, and that is, well, it might be in two forms, but focus on the level of secondary resource use in products. So either let companies obligatorily label the level of secondary material use in each of their products, or even add a tax on that. So the lower your virgin material input is, the less tax you will pay. And that would be a very generic incentive.
Thank you, Walter. Another question is, what options are there for circular economy in Nigeria's oil industry? The question is from Paul Omorekbe. Jocelyne, could you kindly answer this question? Jocelyne? All right. In the meantime, we'll move on to the next question from Ben Eguzozi in Nigeria. Talking about circular economy in the pandemic era, how can we safely operate this amid the quest for herd immunity? Soren or Carl, would you like to answer?
Yeah, but I need you to repeat the questions, please, because I didn't get it properly.
Yeah, of course.
Repeat it, please.
Yes, talking about circular economy in a pandemic era, how can we safely operate this amid the quest for herd immunity?
Very appropriate question. I would have to improvise here, I believe. Maybe the one good news is that in a certain way, this pandemic has led to less production of certain items. It has started to make people think how much they really need, how much they really purchase, how much they really consume. I do know from the fashion industry, for example, that they obviously had to change dramatically because this was about global supply chains and how to react to a pandemic, which made it impossible for the global fashion industry actually to continue operating as they used to. So in terms of production, that was obviously negative, but in terms of having people think about whether we really need to produce everything we reduce, and here I'm talking obviously about fast fashion mainly, if we stay in the fashion industry, was probably a good thing, I would say. The second part of the question is, I don't necessarily see an immediate barrier by a pandemic such as the one we are currently in to circularity. There is probably a lot of potential, but as I said, I would need to improvise, and I don't have a proper immediate answer to that. Maybe Kyle has something to add here. I don't know.
Sure. Within my industry, which is architecture and engineering, we're finding a very high demand for increased ventilation of facilities. And I can imagine this is applicable for most offices across the world. So it takes a lot of input from the individual and all stakeholders to make a circular economy a reality. So therefore, if you have a barrier for this sort of partnership between individuals, meaning we can't necessarily communicate or coordinate with each other as easily now because of the pandemic. Within the built environment, we're seeing increased requests for ventilation, as well as the materials that we are using. The materials that we typically spec for buildings are not necessarily historically the healthiest, but now as we're seeing an increased focus on human health within the pandemic, we're seeing new initiatives that are allowing us to question what materials we're utilizing, what services our mechanical systems are providing that allow people to get back to, coordinating with each other and working with each other. So I think, for me at least, the pandemic and the circular economy, the connection to it is facilitating the ability of individuals to partner with each other again and implement some of these initiatives by providing the space that's healthy enough for them to do so from the very start. So hopefully that gave a little insight to your question. Hopefully Soren and I both were able to sufficiently answer that for you.
All right, thank you very much both. So now we are going back to the question for Jocelyne from Paul Omorekbe in Nigeria. What options are there for circular economy in Nigeria's oil industry?
Recently, we started the reflection on extractive industry and circular economy because these are heavy polluting industries. And yes, there is an opportunity in the oil industry because no matter the industry or in which you're operating, definitely there is a way to embed circular economy principles, be it from the designing phase, from the production phase, and even at the consumer phase. And it is very important that the oil industry gets in to embed circular economy because of the level at which they are high polluting. They can also rethink about the energy even they are using, if they can use energy efficient systems in their extraction processes, if they can do ecosystem regeneration in their after they have exploited the site. That would be very important. And a great way for them to also participate is also by supporting local entrepreneurs and local-based organizations or other organizations which are working in the circular economy field, just to make sure they find a way to work on their extended producer responsibility. So yes, the energy or the oil industry has a whole lot to do with circular economy and can embed circular economy in their design, in their processing, and even by educating consumers on how to use your product, because we know the oil industry is a very great producer of the raw material for the plastic industry as well. And if they are willing maybe to allow recycling thrive by being a fair competitor in this market, is also going to help, because many recycling or recycling companies trying to work in the packaging industry face this stiff competition, because producing plastic packaging, for instance, from crude oil material is still less costly than using the recycled material. So if they can come on board and join hands with those in the recycling industry, knowing that we are all working for our planet, it's going to, so that they establish a fair market for packaging, and it is also going to be one of a great move in the sense of promoting the transition to a more circular economy.
Thank you, Jocelyne, for this very detailed answer. Now we have one last question from Alioune Badara Diatta from Intelligence Magazine in Sénégal. Sa question est: il est dit que l'économie circulaire n'implique pas seulement le développement du recyclage. C'est aussi une solution plus efficace des ressources en modifiant par exemple les modes de production. Mais cela ne risque-t-il pas d'impacter les populations à faible revenu qui ont un faible pouvoir d'achat? Soren, would you like to answer this one, the last one?
Oui, je veux essayer. Un très beau défi. Merci. Je pense que la question venait de Babacar, n'est-ce pas, au Sénégal?
De Alioune.
Alioune, mes excuses. OK. Alors, si l'économie circulaire devient un luxe, ce n'est pas de cette économie circulaire que nous voulons, nous, en tant que REVOLVE Circular. Il est clair que ce nouveau modèle ou ce modèle différent d'une économie linéaire doit être une partie de solution du chômage, de l'utilisation des ressources, de la consommation, ainsi de suite. Donc, c'est clair. Comme je disais sur une partie de ma présentation, il faut que l'être humain soit mis au centre de l'économie circulaire. Maintenant, il y avait une autre question auparavant quant à la création du travail. Il est clair, de mon point de vue, qu'une économie circulaire peut justement générer beaucoup de travail si vous considérez que, par exemple, l'un des action imperatives, donc l'un des éléments clés, je dirais des actions qui s'imposent, si on veut essayer de traduire action imperative vers le français, c'est réparer, la réparation. Donc, on sait tous que dans la réparation de quoi que ce soit, c'est beaucoup de travail. On vit dans un monde où, en fonction du pays où nous vivons, il est simple ou il est difficile de faire réparer certaines choses, que ce soit une voiture, un habit ou autre. Concernant le continent africain, il y a un énorme potentiel dans la pensée circulaire si on considère que toutes celles et ceux qui savent réparer certaines choses et qui le font déjà parce qu'ils vivent déjà dans l'économie circulaire. Je dirais qu'en Afrique, d'une manière générale, beaucoup de pays, beaucoup de gens vivent déjà une vie circulaire assez élevée. Sans le savoir, c'est pas important qu'ils le sachent. Ils le font sans le savoir. Donc, il est important de maintenir en quelque sorte cette manière de faire, de reconnaître peut-être davantage tous celles et ceux qui vivent ou qui travaillent dans ce qu'on appelle l'économie informelle, afin de faciliter la tâche, afin de faire en sorte à ce que ça puisse effectivement créer davantage du travail, que ce soit davantage reconnu, peut-être organisé, pour contribuer de manière positive à leur quotidien. Voilà, en gros, c'est ce que j'aurais à contribuer comme réponse à cette dernière question.
Merci beaucoup, Soren. Now we are coming towards the end of this very exciting conference. And dear journalists, thank you again for joining us. A recording of the event will be provided right after the conference for your adequate coverage. And if you wish to interview any of the panelists, don't hesitate to reach out to us and kindly share links to any news you publish on the topic so we can amplify on social media. And lastly, but not least, for journalists who wish to receive a copy of a book entitled Circular Economy from Dummies, which is co-authored by one of the panelists, are welcome to notify us. Now, any final remarks for my distinguished panelists?
I would like to close by saying that the circular economy certainly does not exclude recycling. It is essentially a last resort. There are many other opportunities before the recycling stage to make value or essentially maintain the value of a product and material. And that's where you're going to find some of the entrepreneurial opportunities globally. So that fact is not limited to any geographic location. It's just about being smarter with using the resources we have. So as far as the book, if anyone tuning in would like a introduction to the Circular Economy for Dummies book, please reach out to me specifically, and I'll work with you there. So thank you everyone who attended.
Yeah, maybe as yes, as a last remark, I'm very happy with the type of discussion that we are having here, because in Europe, the discussion about circular economy tends to be rather techno-optimistic, market optimistic. And I think we need a second strand of circular economy discourses, bridging the huge gap with the reality in African countries, a lot of Asian countries, where the infrastructure of handling waste in a proper way is still to be dealt with. And we were just talking about the informal sector. Actually, a lot of day-to-day recycling happens in these countries. And the challenge would actually be to upgrade the work of all these people in better organized infrastructures of waste handling and recycling and repairing, etc. And but this is something the United Nations, I think, should really pay additional attention to.
Thank you, Walter. Any final remarks from Soren and Jocelyne?
Okay, yes.
Okay.
I think I have to go first. So, just before I give my final remark, à propos de du cher journaliste qui parlait de l'économie circulaire comme n'étant pas, et comme menaçant peut-être la vie des pauvres, moi, je vais lui prendre un exemple très simple. Par exemple, quand tu vas dans les mines dans mon pays, le Cameroun, ou bien dans les mines congolaises, et que tu vois beaucoup d'enfants qui laissent l'école pour aller miner, pour chercher peut-être du cobalt ou bien de l'or et tout, qui leur donnent de l'argent qu'ils utilisent là, peut-être soit pour prendre des stupéfiants, soit pour prendre de l'alcool. On voit que ça n'ajoute pratiquement rien à leur vie. Alors que si ces minerais sont utilisés de manière durable et si l'extraction est beaucoup mieux contrôlée, on éviterait d'avoir des enfants dans les mines, par exemple. Et ces enfants seraient exposés à un avenir meilleur. Juste pour dire que l'économie circulaire a l'action sociale au centre et est soucieuse de toutes les couches sociales afin qu'aucune couche sociale ne soit délaissée, mais que nous tous, nous puissions avancer vers une économie durable ou bien vers un développement économique durable. Merci.
Merci, Jocelyne. Now, Soren, you can conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Jocelyne, and thank you, Yasmina, sorry. Yeah, first of all, thanks for everyone who attended this. I hope it was useful. You may have understood that something called circular economy cannot be understood within just 1 hour when you hear a lot of new complex terms, maybe for the first time. But maybe you found this interesting in the sense that you want to continue reading, hearing, and learning about it. One of the slides I skipped in my own presentation was about 70 concepts which have been identified by a project where Walter is involved in, called Cresting, but also the University of Ibadan, which actually shows that more than 70 different concepts, including, for example, Ubuntu or Buen Vivir, are part of circularity thinking. Another one is the sharing economy. In the African context, what might be interesting or important to say is there's also something called a bio-based economy, where you look even more at your national resources and how to use them for your national economy and society. So the point here is that the circular economy probably tries to say, here I am, embrace me, try to understand me. I'm providing an alternative to a model which is definitely out of date, which is the linear economic model. Unfortunately, we're living in a world which is still more than 90% linear. So we have a lot of work to do. One of the things I'm trying to convey, or I was trying to convey, and I will say again, is that if we look at the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, they have been agreed by over 190 governments around the world. We know we're not on track. We also know that circular economy thinking and doing has a huge potential for achieving the SDGs, and therefore we advocate for looking much more into the circular economy's potential in terms of their contribution for achieving the SDGs, and not talk too much about 2050, but keep talking about what we can do and achieve and what we need to do by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Soren, and all dear panelists. We definitely learned a lot about circular economy today. And I see that our dear journalists are still sending questions. So please don't hesitate to reach out and send us your questions so we coordinate accordingly with our panelists. Thank you all and have a